Looking back, it's almost funny how perfect everything seemed at the start. I met Emily in college, one of those chance encounters that feel scripted, like something out of a romance novel. I was majoring in business, determined to follow in my father's footsteps and take over his small but successful investment firm. Emily was studying psychology, always fascinated by people and what made them tick. She had this way of drawing people in, warm, engaging, effortlessly charming. I was more reserved, focused, methodical in the way I approached everything, including relationships. But somehow, we clicked. We started dating in our senior year, and from the beginning, it felt easy. She was the light to my shadow, the spontaneity to my careful planning. While I spent nights buried in finance textbooks, she would drag me out to late-night diners or spontaneous road trips, always chasing an adventure. I think I fell in love with her unpredictability, the way she seemed to make life electric just by being in it. After graduation, I worked long hours building my career while Emily pursued a master's degree. We moved in together, a small apartment in the city that we barely furnished because we were always out, trying new restaurants, traveling, just living. When I finally proposed, it was in the most practical way possible, over dinner, at home, with a ring placed neatly in the center of her plate. I wasn't one for grand gestures, and she found it endearing. "So very you," she said with a laugh before saying yes. We married 2 years later. It was a simple ceremony, just close friends and family. She was radiant that day, laughing easily, as filled with something I thought was unshakable love. I remember my mother pulling me aside just before the ceremony, whispering, "She's a firecracker, James. Make sure you don't get burned." At the time, I had laughed it off. If only I had known. Over the years, I built a solid life for us. We bought a beautiful house, had joint accounts, planned for the future. I worked tirelessly to ensure stability, while Emily worked in counseling, saying she wanted to help people understand themselves. She was a natural at it, empathetic, intuitive, deeply connected to emotions in a way I sometimes struggled to be. I adored her, even as we settled into the routine of life. I never doubted her, not once. If anything, I thought we had what most couples only dreamed of: respect, deep conversations, passion that never really faded. It was a life that felt full, stable, and unbreakable. But that was the thing about Emily. She was always chasing something. And I would learn, painfully, that some people never stop running, even when they already have everything. As time passed, our life together took shape in a way that felt natural, almost effortless. Emily and I complemented each other in ways that made up for our individual shortcomings. She brought color and spontaneity into my structured world, while I provided the stability and direction she sometimes lacked. It was a balance that worked, or at least, I believed it did. After our wedding, we moved into a beautiful suburban home, a place that felt like a symbol of the future we were building. I had spent years working my way up in my father's firm, and by the time we were married, I was already in a position to provide for us comfortably. Emily, on the other hand, had taken a job at a counseling center, helping people navigate their emotional struggles. She was deeply invested in her work, always coming home with stories about clients who had made progress, or ones who weighed on her heart. She was the kind of person who absorbed the emotions of those around her, feeling everything deeply. We found joy in the little things: late-night drives just to get ice cream, impromptu weekend getaways, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and the newspaper. She always insisted on having fresh flowers in the house, saying they made everything feel more alive. It was a small thing, but it became part of our routine. Every Saturday morning, we would go to the local farmer's market, and she would pick out a bouquet while I picked up fresh produce. Holidays were particularly special with Emily. She had a way of making every celebration feel magical, whether it was Christmas, our anniversary, or even just a random date night she decided needed to be extra special. She would go all out: decorations, gifts, surprises. She loved making people feel cherished, and I was no exception. Our social lives reflected our personalities. I preferred quiet dinners with close friends, while Emily thrived in larger gatherings, always the center of attention in the best way possible. She had an infectious energy that drew people to her. She could talk to anyone about anything, and people naturally gravitated toward her warmth. I was more reserved, content to observe rather than dominate a conversation. But together, we worked. She pulled me into the social world more than I ever would have ventured on my own, and I grounded her when life became too chaotic. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I should have noticed something earlier, if I should have seen the signs that would eventually lead to the unraveling of everything we had built. But at the time, I was happy. I believed she was too. At least, that's what I told myself. In many ways, Emily and I were opposites, but that never felt like a problem. It felt like our strength. She was all heart, guided by instinct and emotion, while I was the planner, the rational one who made sure things stayed on track. She would make impulsive decisions, like deciding we needed to drive 3 hours to the beach just for a sunset, and I would be the one making sure we had gas in the car and a hotel booked if we stayed the night. It was a dynamic that worked, or at least, I believed it did. Our careers evolved alongside our marriage. My role at the investment firm grew, and while it demanded long hours, I felt a sense of pride in building something stable for us. Emily, on the other hand, found herself drawn deeper into her work as a counselor. She had an ability to connect with people in ways I never could, and I admired that about her. She wasn't just good at her job, she was exceptional. Her clients trusted her, confided in her, and she carried their burdens with a quiet grace. Even in our day-to-day lives, our differences complemented each other. I was meticulous, orderly, always making sure everything was in its right place. Emily, on the other hand, thrived in a kind of beautiful chaos. Our house was a reflection of that. A mix of my clean lines and organization with her eclectic decorations and little messes of creativity. Books left open on the couch, half-finished paintings tucked into corners, fresh flowers in every room. It was as if she left pieces of herself scattered throughout our home, and I loved that about her. She had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. A simple dinner would turn into a candlelit evening with music in the background. A lazy Sunday morning became an adventure just because she decided we needed to try a new coffee shop across town. She was unpredictable in the best way, always adding something new to our routine. Our love life was no different. There was passion, warmth, and intimacy that felt natural and effortless. She made me feel wanted, made me feel like the only man in the world. And I, in return, gave her everything I had. Looking back, it's easy to see how much I took for granted. I never doubted her love, never questioned the world we had built together. We had our share of disagreements, like any couple, but they were always resolved with laughter or a quiet moment of understanding. I trusted her completely. And trust, I would later realize, was the most dangerous thing I ever gave her. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when things started to change. At the time, I didn't see it for what it was. I brushed it off, rationalized it, convinced myself that everything was fine. But hindsight is a cruel thing. It started subtly, in ways that were easy to overlook. Emily became distant. Not in an obvious way. If anything, she was more affectionate than usual, almost overcompensating. She would kiss me longer in the mornings, tell me she loved me more often, make plans for us like she was trying to prove something. But it felt different, rehearsed. Like she was playing a role rather than living in the moment. She started spending more time away from home. It wasn't unusual for her to stay late at work, but now she had new reasons: dinners with colleagues, networking events, weekend self-care outings that didn't include me. She would come back energized, glowing in a way that didn't feel like it came from a simple night out. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, became something she kept close to her at all times. She would angle the screen away when she texted, leave the room to take calls, and became strangely protective over a device that had never been a source of secrecy before. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining it. I was working long hours, and stress had a way of making people see problems where there were none. Emily was just busy, I told myself. People changed as they grew in their careers. Relationships went through phases. It was normal. But then, there were the unexplained absences. The times she said she was going to meet a friend, only for that friend to casually mention later that they hadn't seen Emily in weeks. The moments when she would come home late, flustered, her hair slightly disheveled in a way that didn't match the casual dinner she claimed to have had. The scent of a cologne that wasn't mine lingering faintly on her clothes. Doubt crept in slowly, poisoning the trust one had once given her so freely. One evening, as I sat on the couch waiting for her to come home from another, last-minute dinner, I felt a hollow emptiness settle in my chest. Something was wrong. I knew it. I just didn't know how bad it would get. I kept telling myself that everything was fine. That Emily was just going through a phase, that maybe I was overanalyzing things because of stress. But no matter how much I tried to push my suspicions aside, the feeling that something was off never left me. She was different. Not drastically, not overnight, but in subtle ways that added up the more I noticed them. The way she lingered in front of the mirror a little longer before leaving the house. The way she was glued to her phone but rarely shared anything about her day. She had always been open, talkative, eager to fill silences with laughter or stories from work. But now, our conversations felt forced. She was polite, affectionate even, but distant, like she was performing a version of herself rather than being present with me. She started going out more often, always with an explanation that sounded reasonable on the surface. Dinners with coworkers, late-night gym sessions, weekend self-care trips that left me alone in our home, waiting for her to return. She still told me she loved me, still kissed me in the mornings before leaving for work, but something about it felt different. Like she was saying the words out of habit rather than meaning them. The intimacy between us changed, too. She became more distant, finding reasons to avoid moments that once came naturally. She was too tired, too stressed, not in the mood. I tried to be patient, to be understanding, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't exhaustion or stress that was keeping her away from me. It was something else. The house felt emptier, even when she was there. She would sit next to me on the couch, scrolling through her phone, nodding absently when I spoke, but never really engaging. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, like I was watching us drift apart in slow motion, powerless to stop it. I told myself I was imagining things, that all couples go through rough patches, that this was normal, that she wasn't pulling away from me, life was just getting in the way. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. I just didn't know what. The more I tried to convince myself that everything was fine, the more reality refused to let me believe it. The distance between Emily and me was no longer just a feeling, it was tangible, suffocating. She was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to reach her. She had always been someone who thrived on connection, on deep conversations and shared experiences. But now, she seemed detached, like her mind was somewhere else even when she was sitting right next to me. She would laugh at my jokes, kiss me on the cheek, say all the right things, but it was empty. Forced. A version of our life that only existed on the surface. The excuses became more frequent. She worked late more often. She had new hobbies that didn't include me. She went to bed earlier, or later, always at different times than me. At first, I chalked it up to routine changes, stress, anything that could explain why she was drifting. But the inconsistencies were piling up, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore them, they were becoming impossible to dismiss. One night, she claimed she was going to dinner with coworkers. Nothing unusual, except when I casually asked which restaurant they had chosen, she hesitated for just a second too long before answering. It was the kind of pause that meant she was thinking of a lie, not recalling a memory. I didn't call her out on it, but my stomach twisted into knots as I watched her finish getting ready, applying perfume she hadn't worn in years. She came home late that night, later than she said she would. I was still awake, sitting in the dimly lit living room, pretending to be absorbed in my laptop. She walked in with a slightly rushed, guilty energy, like she hadn't expected me to still be up. "How was dinner?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She smiled, too easily. It was nice. Just the usual work talk. She didn't offer details, and I didn't press. But as she turned to head upstairs, I noticed something that made my heart pound. The faintest hint of cologne that wasn't mine. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay seated, to breathe, to not overreact. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just from someone at the restaurant, lingering in the air. But the nagging suspicion had taken root in my mind, and no amount of rationalizing could make it go away. That night, I lay awake next to her, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. I didn't have proof. I didn't have answers. But I had a feeling. And I was starting to realize that feelings, when they refuse to leave, are usually telling the truth. The tension between us was growing, but Emily acted as if nothing had changed. She still kissed me goodbye in the mornings, still sent the occasional text during the day, still went through the motions of being my wife. But that was all it was now, motions. The warmth, the closeness, the unspoken ease between us had vanished, replaced by something artificial. A performance. And I was the only one in the audience who knew it wasn't real. She was away from home more than ever. Late nights, sudden errands, weekend plans that didn't include me. She was careful, though, never giving me an outright reason to suspect her, always making sure her explanations sounded reasonable. But no matter how much she tried to mask it, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. One night, she claimed she was going to visit her mother. It was an excuse she had used before, and I never questioned it. Until this time, when her mother called me while Emily was supposedly with her. The call was brief, nothing out of the ordinary, but when I casually asked, "How's Emily doing?" her mother hesitated. "Oh, I haven't seen her in a few weeks, but I should call her soon." My chest tightened. I forced a smile into my voice. Yeah, she's been really busy. I ended the call and sat there, gripping my phone, my hands shaking. She had lied. To my face. Without a second thought. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me. Until now, I had been trying to hold on, to justify her behavior, to convince myself that I was just imagining things. But this wasn't imagination. This was real. And now, I wasn't just suspicious, I was certain. I started watching her more closely. Not snooping, not searching through her things. Just observing. And the more I paid attention, the more the cracks became undeniable. The way she would check her phone and smile before quickly locking the screen. The way she seemed distracted, lost in thoughts she never shared. The way she looked at me, not with love, but with something else. Guilt, maybe. Or worse, indifference. The realization came slowly, like a heavy weight pressing down on me. I didn't know who she was anymore. And I had this sinking feeling that, soon, I was going to find out. The call came in the middle of the afternoon. I was at work, drowning in spreadsheets, my mind barely focused. My phone buzzed, and when I saw my mother's name, I answered immediately. She rarely called during the day. I barely had time to say hello before I heard the strain in her voice. James, you need to come home. Now. Something in her tone sent ice through my veins. What's wrong? She hesitated. Then, with quiet devastation, she said, It's Emily. I saw her. My stomach clenched. Saw her doing what? Another silence. Then the words that shattered my world. She's having an affair. I saw her with your father. The room around me blurred. My grip tightened around my phone until my knuckles turned white. What did you just say? My voice was low, dangerous. She took a shaky breath. I went to your father's house this morning to drop something off. I wasn't supposed to be there long, but then, I saw them. In the living room. Kissing. Laughing like they had no shame. She paused, voice thick with emotion. James, they didn't even notice me. I stood there for minutes, frozen, just watching them. They were comfortable. Familiar. Like this wasn't the first time. A roar of pure rage built inside me, pressing against my ribs like a caged animal. My own father. My wife. The two people who should have been my foundation, my blood and my love, betraying me together. I didn't remember much of what happened next. 1 second, I was sitting at my desk. The next, I was in my car, speeding toward my father's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might snap. My heart pounded, my vision blurred with fury, my thoughts a chaotic storm of betrayal and disbelief. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was shaking. The rage inside me was no longer something I could contain. It burned through me, hotter than anything I had ever felt before. I threw the car door open and stormed toward the house. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. I shoved the door open so hard it slammed against the wall. And there they were, Emily and my father, sitting on the couch, close, too close. Her hand resting on his leg, his arm draped casually over the back of the sofa, as if this was normal, as if this was their home. As if I didn't exist. The second they saw me, their faces changed. Emily's eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening as if to speak. My father, for the first time in my life, looked caught off guard. And then, everything inside me snapped. You disgusting, worthless pieces of shit. My voice thundered through the house, raw, shaking with fury. How long? How fucking long have you been doing this? Emily scrambled to her feet, her face pale. James, please let me explain. Explain what? I took a step closer, fists clenched. Explain how you've been screwing my father behind my back? Explain why you decided to rip my life apart? I turned to my father, my voice dripping with venom. And you? You're supposed to be my father. My fucking blood. I shook my head, my whole body trembling. You make me sick. He had the audacity to look calm, as if this was just another conversation. James, listen. No. You listen. My voice was cold now, steady despite the fire raging inside me. You two? You're dead to me. I never want to see either of you again. Emily started crying, reaching for me, but I stepped back like her touch would burn me. I trusted you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I loved you. And you threw it all away. Her sobs filled the room, but I didn't care. I turned on my heel and walked out. The life I thought I had, the marriage, the family, the love, it was all a lie. And now, it was time to burn it all down. The drive home was a blur of rage and betrayal. My hand shook against the steering wheel, My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. My thoughts were a violent storm, crashing against each other, demanding release. Emily. My father. Together. I had suspected something for months, but never in my worst nightmares did I imagine this. If she had been with another man, a stranger, some faceless nobody, it would have hurt. But my father? The man who raised me, who was supposed to guide me through life. The sheer depravity of it made me feel sick. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were steady again, my mind terrifyingly clear. The initial explosion of rage had passed, replaced by something colder. Sharper. Controlled destruction. Emily wasn't home yet. Good. That gave me time. I walked straight to my office and turned on my computer. I accessed our joint bank accounts, the one she had depended on for years without a second thought. She had no financial independence, she never needed it. She trusted me to handle everything. Big mistake. With a few clicks, I froze the accounts. Every single one tied to my name. No more spending. No more access. Next, I logged into my credit cards, removing her as an authorized user. I blocked her from my business assets, locked down every financial avenue she could possibly use. Then, I called my lawyer. I need to file for divorce, I said, my voice eerily calm. He hesitated. James, I know this is sudden, but she cheated on me, I cut in. With my father. Silence. Then a sharp breath. I see. I'll have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. Good. And I want her out of my house. Legally, she has rights to it. It's my house, I snapped. I bought it before we were married. She has no claim to it. Another pause. Then she has no right to stay. You can serve her an eviction notice immediately. I exhaled slowly, my grip tightening around the phone. Do it. The moment I hung up, I felt something shift inside me. The betrayal still burned, but now there was something else control. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was the one making the moves. Emily would walk into this house tonight expecting to cry, to beg, to manipulate. She would try to spin a story, paint herself as the victim, maybe even try to save us. But when she arrived, she wouldn't find a heartbroken husband willing to listen. She would find a locked door, frozen bank accounts, divorce papers, and the cold, hard truth she had lost everything. I sat in the living room, waiting. Every second that passed only fueled the fire inside me. The rage wasn't just burning anymore, it was consuming. My own wife. My own father. The two people who should have been my foundation had torn my life apart in the most disgusting way possible. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought I would be weak. They thought I would listen, forgive. They thought they could betray me and still keep everything I had built. They were wrong. Her car pulled into the driveway. Headlights cut through the darkness. My fingers curled into fists as I listened to the sound of her heels clicking against the pavement. Then a click. She tried the door. Locked. I had changed the locks hours ago. She wasn't getting back in. A pause. Then a frantic rustling. She was searching for her keys, her breathing growing more panicked when she realized they wouldn't work. Then bang. She knocked, hard. James? Her voice was shaky. James, open the door. I walked slowly, deliberately, stopping just behind the door. My chest was rising and falling with barely contained fury. You don't live here anymore. A sharp inhale from the other side. What? You heard me. My voice was deadly calm. We're done. Another bang on the door. James, please. Just let me in so we can talk. I let out a bitter laugh, a sound so hollow it almost startled me. Talk? Now you want to talk? My voice was rising, the anger bubbling over. Where was that when you were spreading your legs for my father? A choked sob. James, You what? You're sorry. I slammed my fist against the door, making her yelp. You sure as hell weren't sorry when you were screwing him. You weren't sorry when you were lying to my face. How long, huh? How fucking long? Silence. Answer me. I roared. More silence. I exhaled sharply through my nose. Of course, she wasn't going to admit it. She had spent years lying. That's what she did best. I grabbed the envelope from the table, ripped it open, and threw the divorce papers out onto the porch. Signed them. I turned away, but I could hear her still standing there, breathing heavily. She was probably crying, shaking, trying to figure out how to manipulate her way out of this. Not this time. Finally, she spoke. Weak. Pathetic. James, please, don't do this. I made a mistake. A mistake? A mistake? My vision blurred with rage as I turned back toward the door. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did? That was a fucking choice. Another sob. I didn't care. You thought I'd let this slide? I sneered. You thought you'd come back here and cry, beg, and I'd take you back? That I'd still be your little provider while you let my own father fuck you? James? Get out. I bellowed. She flinched audibly, her sobs turning desperate now. She still wasn't moving. I ripped the door open. She stumbled back, her tear-streaked face pale under the porch light. Her lips trembled, her eyes pleading. But all I saw was disgust. Take your shit and get the hell off my property. My voice was low now, steady, but the fury behind it was lethal. She shook her head. Please, I don't have anywhere to go. I laughed. A cold, cruel sound. Not my problem. Maybe you can go cry to your new boyfriend. I took a step toward her, my presence towering, unrelenting. Or better yet, why don't you go move in with my father? Her face twisted, and for the first time, I saw it, fear. Good. I picked up her purse from the small table beside the door and threw it at her. Now get out. She barely caught it, her hand shaking, her breath ragged. She stared at me, still hoping for something, anything to hold on to. But there was nothing left. I slammed the door in her face. I heard her sobbing, pleading from the other side, but I didn't listen. I just locked the door and walked away. The next morning, I woke up to silence. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps moving through the house, no sound of Emily humming softly in the kitchen, no scent of her perfume lingering in the air. She was gone. I had won, but it didn't feel like victory. The anger was still there, simmering beneath my skin, but beneath it was something else, a hollow emptiness. This was the woman I had built a life with, the woman I had once adored. And yet, last night, I had thrown her out like trash, because that's what she had become. I walked through the house, the weight of everything hitting me all at once. The betrayal, the lies, the years wasted on someone who had never deserved me. Everywhere I looked, there were remnants of our life together, photos on the walls, the wedding album tucked away on the bookshelf, the ring she had left on the nightstand. I picked it up, rolling it between my fingers. The symbol of a promise she had shattered. I clenched my fist around it before tossing it into the trash. By the afternoon, my lawyer called. The divorce papers had been delivered. Emily had tried to fight it at first, pleading, bargaining, promising things she could never take back. But when she realized I had cut off all access to my money, that the house was legally mine, that she had nothing left, she signed. By evening, I had blocked her number. I didn't need to hear her excuses. I didn't need closure. I was the closure. As for my father, he had been trying to reach me all day. Call after call, voicemail after voicemail, all ignored. He had lost me. Forever. By the time night fell, I sat alone in my living room, staring into the darkness, letting the silence sink in. I had lost my wife, my father, the illusion of the life I thought I had. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something else. Freedom. This was no longer our home. This was mine. No more lies. No more betrayal. Just me. And that was enough.